at OSU is specifically for building structures and specifically structural engineering. So most structurals, when they go to school, they go through the civil department, and then they kind of choose which area of civil that they want to go into. But mine was decided for me, and I stuck through it, the 5-year program. But it's perfect because I love buildings, which I know sounds very nerdy, but I'll walk in a building and just look up immediately and appreciate the structure and how it's put together. And so mom was right. It really was what I love to do and what I was good at, and I can kind of apply those together. So
Some people say, well, you go with architectural design or whatever, architectural engineering, but you chose structural. Where are the sort of differences there between the two?
yeah, I try not to say architectural engineering because people think that I'm an architect, and
Mhm.
it's really structural engineering. So I like to describe it as the body. So like the architects will design the outside, what you see, and then the structurals will design the bones. So you have to have something to hold up the body. So the architects kind of dream it up, and we make it happen. And it's hard because architects are very creative, and some of the things that they dream up are very hard to build and make sure that is safe and will stand. So I like that challenge of it though too. But being an AE gives me the ability to be creative too, and not just design a box or something simple.
Is there a style you like particularly?
But yes, I really appreciate. I think my favorite building, it sounds weird, is the Iron Building, in New York City. It's shaped like an iron, that's why it's called that. It has kind of a 1920s. I don't think it's Art Deco, but kind of the older style. Architecture school really taught me to like straight lines and everything aligning, black and white, simple, and that's the way I like things as well. So it's hard to describe like a specific style, but it's definitely if you see like the posters I've made around, everything aligns perfectly. And they really taught us presentation in school, and that was something in engineering college we wouldn't have taken the design classes, but in AE we took almost all of the design classes that the architects take.
Wow. And that iron building, is it's shaped like an ironing board iron?
No, like an actual iron, like a triangular shape. So if
Oh,
you
okay.
look
Like
down,
an
like in
anvil?
plan,
No,
yeah.
yeah, like an anvil.
Mhm.
Oh, okay. Wow. Wow.
It's strange because on the end it gets really narrow and curved, and it would be hard to fit any kind of usable space in there. But yeah,
Now you said you've been doing structural for 15 years. Now you had a stint as a teacher
I
though.
did.
Was
Yeah,
that at
in
Union?
I was a Broken Arrow for
Broken Arrow.
2, and then a STEM school for 1, and I took a 4-year break and taught during
You
that.
from the core from you said you were at a
I worked at the private sector, and then I went to teaching, and then I came back to the private sector, and I did a year deployment with FEMA actually through my job there. And then when I came back, I ended up coming onto the Corps, which was really neat because it was kind of the perfect marriage of all of my past. The teaching applied, my work with FEMA applied, the engineering applied, and I've been able to use that here every single big bout of experience I've had here.
was that a disaster recovery or was it a disaster mission?
It was after Hurricane Irma.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah. When you were teaching, why did you decide to go do that?
My parents were both teachers. I was the kid that would teach her stuffed animals when she was little, and I just always had a passion for that. I like people and I like helping people, and it's fun to me. And I get to teach math, which is really fun to me. I'm very nerdy, so
Which stuffed animal was your best student?
probably the bear. He had a tie, so he was very serious.
He was a studious bear.
Yes, he was.
What have I not asked you that I should have asked you?
I think one of the things I was thinking about earlier is if I got asked the question of what I like about being an engineer or why I wanted to be an engineer. And it comes down to helping people. And that's, you don't always think about that in engineering. And civil or structural engineering is under the civil engineering branch, which, civil is all about people. And what I do is I protect people as a structural engineer. I make sure that they go into a building that's safe and that if anything happens to that building, they'll still be safe or find a way to exit safely. I like to describe it to my students as 9/11. And I ask them, should the building have fallen? What do you think? And we talk about that. And we talk about why it did and how me as an engineer can learn from that and be a better engineer and build a safer building, or a way to delay that so that people can get out of the building. And that's something with the Army Corps, the way we design buildings, we design them a little sturdier and to last a little differently than in the private sector. And we did that with AIT. We had to design for progressive collapse resistance. So if something happens, we delay that time so that everybody or most people can get safely out of the building. So um, I really look at I'm not just designing cool buildings. I'm not just an engineer, I'm not in it for the money. But I get to know that I'm helping people and I'm helping the Army. I'm helping to make their lives better and safer.
Kim, thank you so much for taking the time. I know this was really short notice. I called you or I saw you in the elevator and I said, "Hey, I need to do a podcast interview with you." And you said, "Okay, maybe later." And then you called me back.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can do it. So I appreciate that. Thank you so much for your
Yeah.
time. It's always great talking to you. Thank you for joining us for Corestruction. Corestruction is a production of the Tulsa District U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Public Affairs Office. This episode of Corestruction is brought to you by the Engineering Branch of the Engineering Division of the Tulsa District U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Thank you for joining us. Have a great day and have a great Engineers Week.
On 20 September, almost 3 months after the North Korean communists launched their invasion, United Nations troops are in the first stages of their all-out drive toward North Korea. 5 days previously, they went from the defensive to the offensive when U.S. Marines made an amphibious landing 150 miles behind the enemy lines at Incheon. The landing cut off the enemy from his supplies and caught him in a giant United Nations pincers. Air Force, Navy, and Marine planes give support to ground troops and cut off communist attempts to bring up reinforcements from the north and south. Exactly 3 months to the day after the city of Seoul fell to the communist invaders, UN forces recapture this South Korean capital. These are Marines and U.S. 7th Division troops advancing into Seoul under enemy fire. Street fighting rages throughout the city. The Reds have fortified many of the buildings, and red tanks may appear around any corner. It had been hoped that Seoul might be recaptured with a minimum of destruction. But this is impossible, as the Reds stage a house-to-house fight. After a 5-day battle for Seoul, General MacArthur announces the city's recapture on 26 September. There is still fighting in the city, but the main communist garrison is now fleeing to the north. UN troops rest as they close another chapter of history. At the Ashiya Air Base in Japan during the Battle for Seoul, the 187th Airborne Regiment arrives from the United States. Ammunition and other supplies are loaded on unit vehicles which will be flown to Korea. The paratroopers, 2,400 strong, board C-54 transports and C-119 flying boxcars for their flight to the combat zone. Kimpo Airfield is the destination. The paratroopers are rushed to staging areas as fast as they unload. The same C-54s fly wounded back to Japan. In its first 4 days of operation, the Kimpo airlift evacuated 313 wounded to Japan. Cargo and passenger planes are coming into Kimpo at a rate of 1 every 10 minutes. Typical cargo is this disassembled 280-ton bridge. These ponton boats are part of the bridge, which was shipped entirely by air. The airfield is inspected by Air Force leaders past and present. In the group are General George C. Kenney, Commanding General, Air University, Lieutenant General George C. Stratemeyer, Commanding General U.S. Far East Air Forces, and General Carl Spaatz, retired, former commander of the U.S. Air Force. In the background is a captured Yak fighter plane found in good condition. Now land-based at Kimpo are Marine carrier planes aiding in the tactical support of ground forces north of Seoul. This F-7F Tiger Cat night fighter proves especially valuable during this stage of the fighting north of Seoul. F-7Fs are equipped with radar and are very effective against convoys and troop concentrations at night and in bad weather. These Tiger Cats and Corsairs are being loaded with 5-inch rockets for a strike near Seoul. As UN troops liberate South Korean territory, they find more and more appalling evidence of mass atrocities committed by the Reds. On 6 October, it is estimated that 25,000 South Korean men, women, and children, as well as United States soldiers taken prisoner, have been massacred by the retreating Reds. Bodies are found in many different areas, many having been killed by clubbing and burning, as well as by shooting. One of the largest mass graves is found at Daejeon, where 6,000 atrocity victims are uncovered. When the fighting ends in Korea, these scenes will be evidence for a war crimes investigation. October 17 is a suspenseful day for the U.S. 1st Cavalrymen as they advance into the outskirts of Pyongyang, capital city of North Korea. The city is known to be heavily fortified, and it is expected that the Reds will make a death stand for their capital. It is reported that the Reds have 30,000 men defending Pyongyang. A tropical typhoon hits the U.S. Sakai Army base in Japan. With rain and wind ranging up to 110 miles per hour, it is the worst storm to hit Japan in 16 years. Corrugated metal roofing flies through the air like paper. Most of the tile, shingle, and corrugated metal roofs are damaged. The concrete structures withstand the storm well, although windows are broken and there is water damage. There are no military casualties from the storm since most of the troops remain indoors in the stronger buildings, safe from the falling trees and power lines. But among the Japanese in the storm's path, 135 are killed, over 1,000 injured, and over 200,000 made homeless. The heaviest military damage is suffered by wooden and tar paper buildings. These tropical storms are expected near the Sea of Japan at this time of the year. October 17 is a suspenseful day for the U.S. 1st Cavalrymen as they advance into the outskirts of Pyongyang, capital city of North Korea. The city is known to be heavily fortified, and it is expected that the Reds will make a death stand for their capital. It is reported that the Reds have 30,000 men defending Pyongyang. Another Red is added to the 75,000 captured so far. A vehicle burns beside the road. Ammunition explodes in the fire. The attack is led by tanks as the 1st Cavalry advances under fire toward the center of the city. The railroad guides them. Then, surprisingly, the enemy fire weakens as U.S. infantrymen reach the heart of the city. The Reds are withdrawing. Although there is occasional rear guard fire and sniper activity, the main Red force has begun to flee northward in disorganization. A company medic gives first aid to a cavalryman wounded in the street fighting. As the 1st Cavalrymen overrun the city, South Korean troops join them. The ROK forces met heavy resistance on the east side of town, but finally fought their way through after 6 hours. They are following the retreating enemy northward. An estimated Red force of 30,000 is now fleeing Pyongyang. South Koreans and 1st Cavalrymen join forces, decide their zones of action, and move on. In the eastern area of Pyongyang, near the Taedong River, the South Koreans encounter a pocket of enemy rear guard troops and pause to wipe them out. Only small arms fire is necessary, as the river is crossed by bridge and assault boats. As UN forces take over the city, the North Korean Communist government has vanished, presumably having fled north across the Manchurian border. The heavily fortified capital of Korean communism is now under the United Nations flag. Shortly after the paratroopers take their positions, they are joined by tanks of the 1st Cavalry Division, which have pushed through from Pyongyang. As these forces join, the last remnants of the Red Army are compressed into an area only 50 miles from the Manchurian border. As UN forces take the North Korean capital at Pyongyang, a new threat to the Reds gets underway at Kimpo Airfield. Paratroopers of the 187th Airborne Regiment plan to jump ahead of the Reds fleeing Pyongyang, cutting off their escape route to the border. The planes are C-47 transports and C-119 boxcars. There are over 4,000 men in this operation, which consists of 2 separate drops on 20 and 21 October. The destination is a point 33 miles north of Pyongyang, where the Reds are fleeing through the towns of Sukchon and Suncheon. And here they go. The paratroopers bail out in waves from a dozen planes at a time. On the ground, there is practically no opposition. The attack comes as a complete surprise. Watching the jump is General MacArthur, who flew here from Japan to observe this first airborne operation of the Korean War. Flying over the attack area in his Constellation, the United Nations commander stated, "This closes the trap on the enemy." Of particular interest in this drop is the parachuting of heavy equipment, vehicles, and artillery. The equipment drop takes place 10 minutes after the personnel have landed. Most of the material lands without damage, and the paratroopers rush out to put it into action. Transportation found available on the scene is pressed into service. Although the big jump was delayed at the start by bad weather, it moves like clockwork once it gets underway. Casualties are few. Out of the 4,064 men who made the 2 jumps, only 90 men are listed as jump casualties, and most of these consist of broken legs and sprains. Evacuation is rapid. Specially equipped helicopters land to carry the wounded, and they are quickly on their way back to the hospitals. Shortly after the paratroopers take their positions, they are joined by tanks of the 1st Cavalry Division, which have pushed through from Pyongyang. As these forces join, the last remnants of the Red Army are compressed into an area only 50 miles from the Manchurian border. On 17 September at Busan Air Base, a transport plane arrives with the first big-name entertainer to visit the troops in Korea. Al Jolson, often billed as the world's greatest entertainer, is in the midst of his last road tour. A veteran of years in show business and months of entertaining troops in World War II, in Europe, Africa, India, and the South Pacific, Al Jolson disregarded his doctor's warning and at the age of 64 set out to entertain troops in hospitals and at the Korean battlefront. In front of the audience he liked best, Jolson gives one of his last performances. GI audience enjoys his act. Al entertained Korean War casualties in Japan before arriving in Korea, and already has used up much of the seemingly boundless energy which he put into every performance. It was impossible for Al Jolson not to give out with all his energy and all his heart. His gaiety and rhythm was infectious, and he knew it could bring joy to others. On 23 October, 6 days after he gave this performance, Al Jolson died from a heart attack in San Francisco. One of his last acts in Korea was to raise a United Nations flag. During the month covered by this combat bulletin, the United Nations drive into North Korea moved ahead with surprising rapidity. On 20 September, UN forces were fighting in the outskirts of Seoul, fanning south from the Incheon landing and breaking out of their old beachhead. By 5 October, Republic of Korea troops had crossed the 38th parallel and were 55 air miles beyond the imaginary border between North and South Korea. On the west, U.S. troops were meeting some resistance north of Seoul. United Nations forces, including U.S., British, and Australian troops, were regrouping in expectation of a full-scale drive across the parallel after the United Nations voted approval for General MacArthur to send his troops into North Korea. By 20 October, communist forces were staggering, throwing off their uniforms and surrendering at the rate of 2,400 daily. The day before, Pyongyang, North Korean capital, had been captured by UN troops. 2 hours after Pyongyang was declared secure, members of the 187th Airborne Regiment dropped from planes 33 miles above Pyongyang and about 75 miles from the Manchurian border. South Korean troops drove westward to link up with the paratroopers. On the east coast, South Korean troops had taken Wonsan with unexpectedly light resistance and were advancing far to the north. Disintegrating communist troops were attempting to flee to the Manchurian border. There was still fighting ahead, but at this time it appeared that the Korean War was, as General MacArthur phrased it, definitely coming to an end.
The term "not for the weak or faint-hearted," that's inscripted on a sign right outside of Camp Rogers.
It's beneficial for all soldiers to attend and attempt to learn the Ranger Tab. The reason being is, one, it lets them become a better leader. Also, it teaches them the basics of infantry tasks and battle drills, which they will use in the future. And additionally, it'll help save lives on the field because they can train those soldiers on those tasks, and if they have to, they can execute them flawlessly.
Any and all pre-Ranger courses, whether it be 1st Armored Division, 82nd, extremely beneficial for soldiers in those units, and not only helping them get to Ranger School, but give them a better idea of what are the things that they can expect and hopefully get them the training that they're really looking for to push themselves and be challenged for the future.
Pre-Ranger is an important thing to go to for soldiers because it's kind of like the Expert Infantryman's badge or the Expert Soldier's badge. You get a lot of time both getting out of your comfort zone, equipment you really don't want to wear, and practicing things you need to practice. You also get a lot of hands-on time with things you don't usually touch, like the saw, and then you get a lot of experience with small unit tactics.
On 10 February 2024, the class started with 42 candidates and concluded with the 23 soldiers seated here before you today. These 23 soldiers endured numerous physical and mental stressors. As a result of that, they leave here today knowing their physical and mental capabilities. Most importantly, they return to their organization as a better trained leader who can motivate their soldiers to complete the most difficult tasks.
On December 14, 2023, British Army Lieutenant General Andrew Harrison, Deputy Commander of the United Nations Command, passed the torch of leadership to Canadian Lieutenant General Derek